Welcome everyone back again to my narrative readings of my own book, The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven. So this is the first book in a, upcoming 5-book fantasy series, and I thought it would be fun to, just record and narrate the first book because it's fun. This is going to be the 3rd chapter of the book, so if you want to see how it all started, I'd definitely recommend you go back to the first couple episodes because, I'll be reading through the whole book. This will be, chapter 3, which is called Telshin. And I'll read through the entirety of the chapter and I'll give some final thoughts at the end. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into the story with chapter 3, Telshin. "We are in more danger than I thought," Sirven whispered, mostly to himself, but Jaerel could pick it up and sense his worried tone. By now it was an hour before midnight, and Sirven had finally morphed into his high elven form, making Koraven almost faint at the sight of such a holy being. Never would a gnome expect to see such a magnificent elf in a dirty city such as Vays. Such a sight of unusuality overjoyed him. Filled with awe to simply be in his presence, he stammered his compliments and stared with wide eyes. He bowed low and gave a gnomish signal of his hands, representing that he was talking firstly to an elder, and second to a figure of high importance. He sat down at the edge of the bed while Jaerel stood next to him, concerned, but knew they were safe, at least for now. "What exactly is hunting us?" Jaerel asked, clutching his pocket. "I'm not certain of everything that could or will be hunting you," mumbled Sirven. "But I know the Duun will be out to get you. With your introduction to them, I'm sure you will take different roads back to Mason Rokine." "We plan on following the road past Altorium, but," Jaerel began. "No, do not follow that path," warned Tiradon, startling Koraven that he almost stood up in his friend's defense. "You must wander eastward toward Corval. There are a few stops along the way, landmarks of ages past." "You'll come with us, right?" Koraven asked with concern. The first time he had spoken clearly to the disguised elf and mysterious man, but something about both of them grew into the trust, rather than quickly inside the gnome. "You know most about this enemy that is chasing us." "I will not," the elf said, "but Tiradon will accompany you as far as he can." Jaerel looked upon the mighty warrior with respect, as did Koraven, and they were satisfied with the result. Once again Tiradon had taken out his slender pipe, puffing pleasant clouds and even a few rings, dissipating slowly into the cracked ceiling. His stubble beard was scattered with bits of mud, smeared from the most recent fight downstairs, and his hair was finely dried from the sweat he had before. His gaze was elsewhere, though, spying for more unsavory foes, and most of all, for the phantoms of the darkness. "If the Duun catches up to us," Tiradon continued with a solemn expression, "you must abandon me and flee to the nearest safe zone. There are 2 locations I have in mind, though neither are towns or settlements." "Abandon you?" Jaerel was shocked. "Will it be that serious?" "This entire trip back must be dealt with the utmost caution," Sirven answered. "You must not speak to anyone. Only make stops to feed yourself and spend a few hours each night sleeping. Time is against us, unfortunately, but I may be able to distract any spies ahead or any who linger behind." A long silence followed the elf's strict instructions. So, aspiring melodramatically, Koraven was most upset about the lack of food they might face in the next week. But as Sirven explained the importance of the gem to Koraven, he knew what was to be done, and swore to protect Jaerel before himself, even if the Duun were surrounding them. Sirven and Tiradon were most pleased with the gnome's courageous words, assured of Jaerel's safety around them. If the worst-case scenario came into play, and Duun defeated Jaerel, the quest that had been forming in Sirven's mind would be shattered. There was only a glimmer of hope, but it was enough, at least, for Tiradon's heart to surge with courage. "When do we leave?" Koraven asked timidly. "After dawn, tomorrow," Sirven answered. "You must stay in daylight as long as you can. The Duun depends on the cover of darkness. When the moon is at its peak, they draw their power from it, which is when they are the strongest." "So they have magic inside of them?" asked Koraven again, frightened, yet intrigued. "A deep, dark magic, yes," Tiradon said. "It is one that ties the beginnings of Volcavi with the moon, its original source of drawing power. Therefore we must be careful and have our weapons drawn and ready when resting." "Must there be more instructions?" complained Koraven, to which Sirven gave a snapping, serious look. "You must understand the importance and danger of the current situation," explained the elf. "This gem has been in hiding for hundreds of years, and I cannot have it slip into the hands of the enemy, or Ordia shall fall into darkness far quicker than we have anticipated." Koraven gave a gloomy frown, disappointed in himself, as he inched closer to Jaerel. The mood of the group dampened, and Jaerel no longer held onto the gem's shape in his jacket. That night, none of the small band received any pleasant dreams, or even a good night's rest, their minds drifting to the journey ahead, what precautions they had, and what must be done if bad became worse. It only felt like a few hours before departure time arrived, and no one said anything. Koraven gave a long sigh, patted Jaerel on the shoulder, giving him some comfort, for he knew his friend would suffer most if the plan went wrong. Sirven exited the room first in his elderly form, followed by Jaerel, Koraven, and lastly Tiradon. Once out of the inn's door, Sirven turned sharply to the streets, while Jaerel and Koraven followed him closely to Helagor's stable one last time. Tiradon went on to the northern gate, for he had his horse tied near the wall where the guards were stationed. Helagor was the same as always, hearty and high-spirited, and Jaerel wished he could see him again one day when everything was over. The large man laughed in agreement, giving both half-breeds a strong handshake. Introducing them to Himmelkorn, the mighty steed in Vays, Helagor seemed rather sad to see him go, but inside he knew it would be a simple matter of waiting a few weeks. Himmelkorn indeed was quite strong and well built. He shone of a glorious brown shade and had a lengthy black mane and tail. A saddle of 2 seats was neatly fashioned and strapped to his back, made of fine leather, but as Jaerel examined it closer, he knew it had been used several times before. Not bothered by its use, Jaerel happily took the reins, with Koraven sitting ambitiously behind him, ready to meet Tiradon and begin their adventure. Jaerel, on the other hand, was very much the opposite, wanting more than anything to be back in Mason Rokine, back to the guild of Golf Wavlin, and back to his parents and the gnomish community. The passing thought of his home made his heart burn with a distant longing to return through it, though it was only a month and a half when he and Koraven left for their supposed hunting trip. Reaching into his pockets to pay the friendly man, Jaerel was shocked as he pulled out a handful of golden coins, much more than he had offered Helagor in the first place. The stable master eyed it with wonder, and once Jaerel paid him the full amount, he offered him another few pieces and the remaining silver coins he originally had left. "Blessings to you, lad," laughed Helagor as he pocketed the hefty change. May your trails have luck and your adventures be swift. Come back sometime too. You're always welcome here from now on." "We will always remember you and your hospitality," Jaerel said with comfort. "Thank you for everything." Jaerel gave a short tug to the reins as Himmelkorn snorted briefly before trotting graciously down a large stone street. Jaerel and Koraven felt rather out of place then, being atop a mighty, healthy steed, striding through the waves of the working class of the city. It was not close to royalty, but it was higher than either of them. A short half-hour trip for the duo felt like hours, until they finally met Tiradon at the northern gate, giving his horse a handful of carrots and apples, talking gracefully with it, running his hands through its mane and patting it on its sturdy, lengthy legs. Sitting neatly on its back was a leather saddle with numerous pockets on its sides and packs with rolls of blue blankets behind it. Tiradon's sword was attached to the left side, sheathed in a brilliant black sheath that shone in the bright autumn sun. Its silver crossguard glittered wonderfully as the carved elvish letters stood out with magnificent precision. It was the first time Jaerel noticed this about Tiradon's weapon, which brought a deeper respect for the man in return. Tiradon truly was a mystery, but that riddle would not be so easily solved. To the back of the saddle were the food provisions, and water was on the right. Altogether, this ranger was ready for a long trek across the country of Zayfithia, making Jaerel and Koraven quite embarrassed as their provisions were only tucked away in their packs. As Jaerel and Koraven approached the ranger, he introduced the magnificent golden-brown horse as Beldorn, a mighty horse born and raised in Salmoria, in the very city of Koragi League, prancing through the fields of Silkent and Areleville. And since Koragi League was on the borders of the Grey Ranges, Beldorn had seen what shadowy and dark places were like, yet he had not faced one of the Duun. Even if Beldorn had not seen what powers the phantoms had, Tiradon felt as if his steed could outrun them in a heartbeat. At the sound of his name, Beldorn gave a cheerful whinny, shaking his head playfully. The bond between the horse and his rider was intense, and Jaerel could sense the ties between them through his Magillian sense. A swelling, content feeling came about him then, causing the gem to warm up like a tight embrace as Tiradon mounted Beldorn to take the lead. The pieces were set. Now the time was to put them into motion. Taking one more glance at Vays, Jaerel breathed in deeply, clutching his pocket, the gem returning to its natural state again. His eyes went forward to see Tiradon's green cloak flittering gently in the breeze, along with his black shoulder-length hair, his head remaining forward to focus on the road ahead. Koraven sat sleepily behind Jaerel, his arms grasping Jaerel's side, but not too tight, just enough to hold on in case Himmelkorn would jolt. It seemed almost too peaceful for Jaerel, but he kept it to his advantage, remembering Siren's words about staying in the daylight and using caution as an ally. For many more long hours, the horses ran at an incredible rate, following alongside the travel route but never on it, stopping only once for water, and Jaerel knew Helligor really did give him his best steed. For that he was thankful, and decided once he reached Mason Rokind and found Barlin, he would give some extra coin that he guessed Sirvin had somehow slipped inside before Jaerel paid off Helligor. A smile broke across his face as he recalled the friendly face, the warm home, and the overall vibe of him and his wife. Lost in the thought of happiness, the wind caught through his hair, and he could sense the living things around him, from the heartbeats of Koraven and Tiradon to the steady movements of Beldorn and Himmelkorn. Even the tiny insects crawling below in their miniature kingdoms teemed with life. For a moment he thought he could sense the swaying of the grass, its roots, and even the coarse textures of the soil. Whether true or not, he was glad he could sense something made of light, for once, instead of the menacing, chilling aura of the Vol'dun. Once the bright blue sky began to fade into a burnt orange hue, the clouds hovering peacefully over the traveling trio, Tiradon announced that they would rest for 3 hours, 1 hour for each of them. If the Vol'dun were the strongest at midnight, it was better for the group to ride through the night. Koraven did not like the idea, but once Tiradon suggested that the gnome rest first, he would not argue with him. There was no campfire this time, but rather Tiradon and Jaerel sitting upon a group of boulders, enjoying what they could of the weather. Jaerel looked to the ranger, who seemed lost in thought as his gaze drifted across the plain, and the half-breed wondered what he might be thinking. He had just met this man and already felt at ease with his presence, as was the same with Sirvin. Jaerel reached into his pocket, brushing across the gem's smooth surface, and when he did, he focused his mind on attempting to reach Tiradon's. To his surprise, contact was made, as Jaerel felt a wave of longing in Tiradon's heart. Not one of sorrow, but of waiting for someone, or something, like the ranger was expecting to meet them soon. Jaerel was glad and wanted to ride at once with Tiradon, leading them, but knew, as Sirvin said, there had to be precautions, one of them being adequate sleep. "You're from Salmoria, then," Jaerel said, trying to strike a conversation in the silence. "What's it like there?" Tiradon gave a deep breath, recalling his homeland as he looked at the fading sky. The forlorn look subsided as his countenance changed to a lost verve. "Yes, I am from Karagi League," Tiradon answered, not moving. "It is a mighty city, graceful and beautiful, set upon the banks of Beslid, a shimmering and glistening river. The towers reach the sky, dazzling in both sun and moonlight. The food is plentiful, and the people are kind, bright, and welcoming. You might enjoy it if you are from Mason Rokind." "I am, but I'm not sure if they would allow a half-breed in." "Then perhaps we can prove them wrong." Jaerel looked at Tiradon curiously. "Prove them that half-breeds are just as good-hearted as anyone else, if not better," Tiradon continued with a smile. "Don't compare yourself to those in Vays. They are dirty people and only resort to profit. Your heart is just as strong as all of them if you set your intentions to good things." "Thank you," Jaerel said, feeling somewhat better, but still the despair and continuing self-consciousness were there. "Perhaps when everything is over, Koraven and I will visit you in your grand city." "It seems like the two of you cannot be separated then," the ranger laughed, glancing at Koraven, who remained slumbering in a tight ball. "Both of us are, well, rare, and we must take care of each other because of it. The world isn't the friendly place I imagined it to be when I was young. Because of him, I felt some sort of belonging in the world, if I ever had a purpose or impact on the earth." "And what's that?" Jaerel paused, trying to carefully piece his words that he seemed noble at heart. "I suppose I am a great help among the gnomes. You would have to ask Corey about that, though. Something about them gives me the will to go on. And I do hope that even with my simplest actions, I can help the community out any way I can." Tiradon patted him on the back. "Then I am glad for you," he said with contentment. "Friendship must be kept close, from times of good and times of evil. You will be tested, Jaerel, until the fates of the gems are decided. Keep him close to you, and you shall not fail." Jaerel grinned again with comfort and contentment. On one side, he had his closest friend and now protector, while on the other side was a strong, well-experienced ranger who had already led them safely across the first stretch of the Corvel Plains. This small fellowship, despite their brief connection, was what drove Jaerel to the next step. After Koraven had woken up with a frustrating grumble, Jaerel took the second sleeping hour, for once having pleasant thoughts through his dreams. Koraven, though, felt rather awkward around Tiradon, not trusting fully toward a stranger, but like Jaerel, he felt like some sort of comfort around him, and eased up on the ranger. Once or twice they could have sworn they heard a twig snap, or the rustle of leaves in loose soil. But when nothing happened, and no one appeared, their anxious senses faded, and Tiradon took the final resting hour, leaving the two friends in charge of the stranger. Tiradon drifted off almost immediately. His trust in the half-breeds was obvious, baffling them in return. "I've never had such an unusual week," Koraven admitted to Jaerel, "and everything seems so rushed that my mind cannot keep up with it." Jaerel remained silent, but he concurred with his friend. If Koraven felt that way, Jaerel wanted to explain everything to him, the emotions he went through from the finding of the gem, and the visions and illusions he saw so vividly, to the terrifying Vol'dun and their close bonds to it. Even if Sirven briefly told Koraven of the importance and the ties of the gem, an intense paranoia grew in Jaerel, like he was being watched every second of the day, during his travels, his breaks, and even his slumber. But he couldn't tell Koraven this. He knew his friend would worry twice as much as him, and he didn't want any more stress being loaded onto the small company. The part of the half-breed that wished the gem was found by someone else conjured again in his mind, or to even have it simply placed back in the cave to be forever forgotten, just as it was before. Without fully knowing it, Jaerel touched the blue stone, giving off a radiant glow that he thought that he could see through his jacket. Quickly he retracted, wondering if Koraven had noticed, but his friend was looking high up into the first stars of the waning evening. "Once we're back home, though," Koraven said, practically talking to himself, "both of us can sit back, put our feet up, and chug down a few beers under this same sky. Doesn't that sound delightful?" "Always," Jaerel laughed. "We'll be able to take a break from all this darkness business, at least until Sirven or Tiradon find a place to keep the gem." "You mean you don't want to keep it? It could be so valuable, Jaerel. Imagine the coin that some magi would trade for it. If the king's court hears about it, you'll be in the fanciest crowds in a week." "I don't think so. I wouldn't be that lucky, but I have made up my mind. There is much turmoil inside me that I have not had before, and it's based on this shrouded mystery. Once we are safely in Mason Rokine, I will consult Sirven about its fate." "And after that?" After another long pause, Jaerel said, "I suppose we go back to our normal lives. I'd rather live peacefully than run from a foe every night. The continuing journeys of fear that we've shared are plenty enough already. Plus, we gotta share some mischievous nights with Callie, Bear, and Hal. I dearly miss them. My mind longs for home more than I thought. No, I do desire to be back in Ovlin again, too, and in Golf Wavlin, if only for a weekend." The rest of that night was quiet, but for Jaerel, it was a good sign. The steady breeze of the cold fall air seemed to calm him, though Koraven considered it rather chilly and wrapped his coat tightly around himself. Once Tiradon awoke, they shared a brief breakfast, if one could call it that, and in a moment's notice, Tiradon took the lead until dawn's warm sun greeted them, and Koraven thought of it as a new hope that the rest of the trek was to be successful. He ruminated on the friendly words of Helgor, and in response he sang "The Wonderful World," the song that he had rehearsed to Jaerel earlier, to Tiradon, lifting the ranger's spirits, making him beam once or twice. During that day, none of them felt paranoid at all, but rather full of life, and had no concern about watching for enemies or strangers, not even the dreadful Vol'dun. Turning to Tiradon, Koraven asked if he knew any songs from the great city of Karagi League, or if he had songs of his own. Reaching back to his memory, Tiradon thought of one, though it was short. He was hesitant at first to open his lips to recite it, but once Koraven told him to pipe up, he had to finish all the verses. Touch of grass, the way of the wind, trees sing in harmony like connections of twins. Embraces of the sun, shadows of the moon, silver leaves cry with the morning dew. A light so fine from the Prince Divine, but not so was the Lord of Ill. The ground shakes, the air is ash, all that is good has now turned to black. Lands full of shadows scream and shriek, a darkness so evil, poisoned and bleak. Fumes upon fires from the Prince of Lies, but not so was the Lord of Light. Up he sprang from his throne of gold. Make haste, the time is near, the time to cure this place of fear. And up he sprang to challenge his foe, the one true sword for the final blow. Darkness and light colliding in the night, a shining sword and a poisoned knife. Down came Zarlan, a passionate kill. Down fell Intisham, a passionate king. And all was still, except the breeze. Tiradon's voice faded at the last line, and an air of melancholia surrounded them, turning the gleeful tones to dolorous expressions. Neither of them knew much about the past of Ordia, but the name of Intisham made their heads turn curiously at the ranger, wondering how he could have heard it in the southernmost city of Salmoria. Intisham was the king of Mason Rukine some time ago, during the Second Age, ruling as an elven lord, and was considered one of the best kings in Zephythian history. That was all Jaerel knew from stories and songs, but kept it in mind in case he could ask Sirvan about it. The song from Tiradon's mouth was soothing, no matter how dark or depressing it was. The tune he sang was mellow and low, almost in a humming fashion. Koraven began to nod off in the day's heat after Tiradon's verses, but once the colder wind of the evening settled in, they were back to their regular schedule of keeping extra caution around them. Something about the fields in Enedias, the plains directly east of the road, felt very odd, but Tiradon explained how the Duun would be following them from the south. If they went west, they would run into the Korlag forest, and if they went east, they would find themselves at a strange place called Crow's Nest, a mysterious landmark of forests and cliffs belonging to one man. But for one reason or another, the dark figures of the world stayed clear of him and his lands. Koraven suggested going there, but Tiradon instantly declined the idea, only to direct his comrades straight north. The allied trio continued their way until the sun barely made its presence, but they would not get any sleep that night. Tiradon spotted a peculiar silhouette upon a tall hill, explaining to Jaerel and Koraven that it was a ruined watchtower called Telshin. Zarlan's forces destroyed it in the Second Age when he attempted to cover Ordia in his first siege, but since then no visitors ventured inside, leaving the hill desolate and empty of all life. The ranger assured Jaerel it was not occupied or haunted, as Koraven asked quickly after he saw the finer details of the ruins. Massive stone columns carved neatly on all sides stood tall in a glimmering blue light, planted between the silver-edged cliffs and the hardened soil. The hill itself was quite steep, and once the travelers came up to it at last, they noticed a couple of tunnels running straight into the ground. From inside, it would lead up to the main level of the tower, but the tunnel was too deep inside the hill to see anything yet. Jaerel had already taken out his magical file, but Tiradon waved it aside. He did not want their presence to be known. Without Tiradon, Jaerel knew he and Koraven would have been caught by now, and the tale of the gems would have taken a bitterly dark turn. For that, he was grateful to have Tiradon around, hoping that the Duun were far behind or even scared of the fearless warrior. The trio tied the horses to a weather-beaten wooden post just outside the columns. Tiradon had Jaerel and Koraven leave their packs on, with their weapons drawn for the moment. Ducking into the curious tunnels beneath the columns, he led the frightened friends up a pitch-black spiral staircase, cold and clammy to the touch, as their hands slid across the damp stone. They reached the top level with stumbling feet, meeting an uneasy stone floor where rough grass and messy roots grew between the blocks. More columns, similar to the ones below, surrounded the floor in a circular fashion. There were 7 of them fully intact, while 3 of them were broken down to the dirty ground and short stubble. "You can see for miles from up here," Koraven said, astonished as he leaned against a pillar. "No wonder this was a watchtower." "Yes, indeed," said Tiradon, keeping a watchful eye on the gnome. The dwarves of the mid-Second Age popularized it. Their travels and caravans from Kala's tour to Tulvia and back were widely known and seen. You may even see old runes on the floors or doorways. Jaerel curiously searched for any symbols or markings, but the night was dark and the deep tunnels secreted the doorways away. The blue light of the moon shone glistening on the floors, though most were cracked and worn. "So many people in the past used this very road," sighed Tiradon. "But roots are now the constant visitors and claimers of the trail. A rather somber truth, if I do say." Setting his pack on the floor, Tiradon allowed Koraven to make a small fire, as they were all weary of riding for so long, missing the warmth of flames deeply. Jaerel noticed a cold sweat upon the ranger's forehead, fearing that whatever was behind them would catch up swiftly. Tiradon leaned against one of the columns, his sword resting on his right shoulder, and although he looked rather casual, he was ready to duel whatever enemy came through the tunnels. For some time, Tiradon and Jaerel whispered to one another to make the paranoia seem less ominous, and from it, Jaerel learned of Tiradon's adventures in the city, from times when he was a boy in the city to weeks of travel in the plains of Aureliviel with his horse Beldorn, roaming free in the hills. But as usual, as Jaerel deemed it to be a repetitive subject, Tiradon mentioned the darkness, the foes he had already faced, and those he feared he would have to face sometime in the near future. "Have you fought any creatures like the Duun?" Koraven asked curiously, poking a long stick into the fire and stirring its ashes. "Not quite," Tiradon said with caution. "But for that reason, I do not know their weaknesses, nor does Sirven. But I can assure you one thing. They will try to feed on your weaknesses. If you fear them, they will prey on you and take it to their advantage." "It's a little difficult not to fear a black ghost standing above me," said Jaerel with a cold shiver. "A long white sword in its hand, ready to run me through." Jaerel's mind went back to the scene in Vays, and he shuddered. "But it's times like those," Tiradon encouraged him, "where you must be brave and face your fears. This world is full of evil. If we run from it, such forces of darkness, like our current foes, will only grow stronger." Suddenly, as if in response to the topic, a faint, dull clicking sound, slow and methodical, came to the forefront from behind Jaerel. Not too long after, the familiar sound of chattering teeth followed through. Low-pitched grumbles and deep groans emanated from the dark blue sky. He notified Tiradon of their presence, and in return he sprung to his feet, startling Koraven in the process, who drew his sword almost instantly, shifting to Jaerel's left side. Their eyes darted across the scenery, past the high-standing, broken and cracked columns that stood high with morning dew, expecting any second to meet their pursuers. At first, none of them could see anything until Jaerel spotted a blackened cloud, darker than any shadow, and he knew it was the Duun, for the cloud moved and shifted its way up the steepened cliffs, past the columns, and splashed onto the broken tiles. The gem inside Jaerel's pocket began to burn and prick, just as he thought it would, and he was tempted to take it out and use it against them more furiously than last time. But as he thought about it, he had no idea how to control its power, absorb it, or even extract the energy. Confused, Jaerel backed up against a cold stone wall, with Koraven quivering in front of him, its hands shaking and his sword following the same movements. Tiradon had his view on two other Duun, who materialized just above the peaks of the hill. Glancing at the tangled roots, Jaerel mumbled a simple spell, releasing a small spark of fire down to the dried roots, where they were caught in flame, and since it was a magical flame, it spread in between the stone blocks until it reached the edges of the ruins. As the fire's light danced from the floor to the columns, Jaerel could sense the biting chill of the Duun among its evil smog, its hood up and its cloak waving slowly as if caught in an invisible breeze. Through its hood, he could see a thin mist of silver breath dissipating at a steady rhythm. In his heart, Jaerel could feel the dread that this phantom cast from its presence. But when he recalled Tiradon's kind words just moments ago, the gem resonated a strange strength, giving him the confidence to stay and fight with his best friend and newfound ally. The same pale blade that he had encountered previously flashed in front of him, and before he knew it, the second duel of the Duun began. The phantom's movements were quick, even for Jaerel, who had the agility of an elf, and as the first Duun rushed at him from almost every direction, he could feel the swiftness of his enemy. Thankfully, Koraven swung his sword at the same foe, although quite clumsily, and distracted it enough so that it backed up immediately to conjure a new plan of attack. He yelled at it in a furious shout. "Back! You get back! Away from him at once, or we will run you through!" Jaerel jumped back in shock, startled that his friend could scream so loud that he thought the Duun winced with him. Suddenly, he was worried that Tiradon would have fallen by now, but when he turned to check on him, the half-breed was more surprised to see that the ranger was still standing strong. Tiradon had his long sword in one hand, gripping its hilt with its life, while he had a lengthy curved dagger in the other for defense. Along the blade of the dagger were etched red runes of speed, so that once he lunged forth or parried from an incredibly fast-paced attack, his other weapon was there to protect him, as if an invisible hand was there for his defense. Crimson spark, mixed with the sudden burst of black smog, ignited as the Duun's blade crossed with the ranger's for a long, intense moment. They shrieked and screamed at the mighty warrior, as he would not be so easily beaten or turned over to them. Their lightning pace shifting was surprisingly equal to Tiradon's, and Jaerel could tell he had many years of experience, either in training or in actual battle. But now was not the time for past stories or to revel at Tiradon's speed. Jaerel shuffled to his aid while Koraven stayed between the ranger and the half-breed, stabbing wildly in the dark, half expecting to run his blade through a cloud of thick smoke. Occasionally the gnome would strike the opponent's blade with a loud clang, but the force was so strong it sent him stumbling into either Jaerel's or Tiradon's back. This was no fight for a gnome, but Koraven continued with a fiery passion. With very clumsy attempts to defeat the Voldoon, Tiradon felt that they would not last until the end of the night, being stuck in the same position, performing the same attacks, blocks, and parries. The Phantom's movements were too quick, and although Tiradon did not want to admit it, Koraven slowed them down. The flame of Jaerel's spell was dying as the Voldoon's black clouds hovered over them, creating a layer of dull silver ice, void of life and happiness. Jaerel struggled to keep his motivation up as the ghost's presence drained every ounce of joy out of him and Koraven. He wondered if Tiradon's mind had gone in the same direction, but doubted it greatly as the ranger fought with full strength. The tiniest of hope resided in this man, and Jaerel could not let him down, especially at a moment like this. Jaerel stood his ground again, and as he helped Koraven to his feet, they made one strong push against their foes, clashing their blades and gritting their teeth. If they had faced the Phantoms before, they could duel them at least once more, and what was better, they would help a respectable warrior against the forces of evil. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, and if it was by sheer luck or the leadership of Tiradon, the trio managed to slip quickly into the shadows of the tunnel, their footsteps tracked by the Voldoon with every second until they reached the bottom of the stairs. Something happened then that neither Jaerel nor Tiradon expected. A loud, clear horn ran sharply through the haunting air, piercing the darkness as if some spell had lifted its curse. One single note rose high and low, and then again until it was forcibly halted, most likely by one of the Voldoon. Tiradon's head jolted back and forth to find its source, like he knew exactly who or what it sounded like. Desperation filled his exhausted face, and the color of his skin turned to a cold gray. There was a moment of hesitation until he darted back up the stairs to join the stranger at the top level, bringing with him the remainder of his enemies. Koraven had stopped in his tracks below the ruins with Jaerel directly behind him, cautious in choosing his decision. Once he heard the shrill sounds of the Voldoon and the clanking of steel on steel, the gnome rushed out to where the horses were rearing wildly in the reins, more frightened than their riders, anxious to spring out at full speed. But when Jaerel stepped into the cold night breeze, an unknown fourth Voldoon was upon him in an instant, causing the half-breed to tumble to the ground, his sword clambering to the broken tiles. The Phantom floated above him as his body weakened in an instant and was captured under a dark curse. He was immobile and petrified by its aura and daunting presence. Its cloak seemed to twist and turn about its vile, freezing body, while the fog thickened around itself and Jaerel. The blackness inside of its hood was altogether evil, if even nothing was to be seen. Yet, when the Voldoon was face to face with Jaerel, he could see faint, thin lines of dark magic originating from its hood. He fainted then, but what Koraven saw he could never get out of his head. A bright blue stream of mist came out of Jaerel's mouth, as if his very spirit flowed like a slow current in a river. His jaws opened unnaturally as it was forced to open, and his body was shaking as if he was in a seizure. The once healthy skin of the half-breed turned to an icy cold surface, and his fingers froze into place, curled and unmoving. The shining spirited streams drifted slowly through the air, corresponding with strange silver lines originating from within the Phantom's hood, where a faint inhaling breath could be seen and heard by the gnome. But what was inside the hood now was what Koraven could not forget. Inside the voided hood was a pale head, though the only feature it had was a cracked mouth. When it opened, it unhinged in an unnatural way, parting its lips, bearing jagged teeth riddled in dark blood and decaying brown rot. A poisonous liquid dripped from the top row, drooling down its barely visible chin, which was a deathly white. The longer it inhaled, sounding like someone being mercilessly choked, the bigger its mouth seemed to open, a hopeless void where life went to die. Inside its mouth was a faint glow of silver light, and when Jaerel's blue stream came nearer to it, the brighter the light would grow. With its skeletal hands, the Voldoon began to reach out to Jaerel, specifically to his pocket, but kept its attention on draining the very essence out of the half-breed. Time and time again, Koraven heard the constant inhaling made by the Voldoon, and he was stricken there in his stance as he gazed upon the phantom with an awestruck horror. In a dazed trance, Jaerel had absolutely no control over his body or mind. He could feel his memories become twisted, filled with false lies. The phantom's ruling and dominion were so powerful for Jaerel that he began to believe them. He saw himself lesser, more than he had felt now, and he saw himself struggling under a decaying hand stretching out over him. He was alone in an empty field, surrounded by gray and withering grass, while the clouds above rained in sorrow. In the far distance he could see a ruined city, a once mighty establishment of grand towers now brought low and razed to the ground. Billowing smoke curled from the rubble, mixing with the wispy clouds, blocking out the sun and giving off such a deep depression that Jaerel began to cry. He was not sure why, but his heart's sadness brought him low. He was nothing and could do nothing. If he had been chosen for this task, he would have already failed, and the ruling of evil was his fault. He dropped to his knees as he covered his face in shame until he lay spread out in the coarse, dry dirt. Defeated, he waited for death's messenger to come his way. A great pain suddenly shifted from his neck to his head until it was pounding like a drum. Then from all around him came a chilling, whispering voice that echoed, saying, "I have found you. I have found you. I have." But it was abruptly interrupted as Koraven came charging in, driving his sword straight through the Voldoon's hood, making it yell out in what sounded like pain. But coming from an apparition such as this, neither Koraven nor Jaerel knew if it was wounded from a simple steel weapon, or angered about its enchanting curse being broken. It did the trick, though, as the Voldoon toppled backward through one of the thick columns. Koraven helped Jaerel to his feet, and in a boggled hurry they untied Himmelkorn, and in a few seconds they were off on the road again in a terrified pursuit. Once the two friends left the hill on Telshin altogether, Jaerel peered over his shoulder, first to see if their foe was chasing them, and second to try to notice some sort of sign that Tiradon was still alive. Out of the tall grass he could make out the Voldoon he was so bitterly assaulted by, and behind it lay the ruins, where bright flashes of magical light ignited every few seconds like dancing fireflies in the dark silhouette. Curious, he wondered if Tiradon knew magic, at least the simplest of defense, but guessed that the friendly stranger who had blew the piercing horn was a hidden magi. He glanced again at the Voldoon, rapidly approaching them, almost keeping pace with Himmelkorn, who had not run this fast in his whole life. The heavy breathing of the steed deepened with every stride he took as his hooves dug into the cold ground. Thin puffs of weariness came from Himmelkorn's widened nostrils, and Jaerel and Koraven knew he could not keep up this pace for the rest of the night. Jaerel panicked then, but suddenly had an odd idea. Yet if it was to lead them far away, it was worth a try. With Jaerel's command, Koraven clumsily took the reins while the half-breed placed the gem in his palm, allowing the surge of the immortal's energy to flow through his veins, making him shiver at first touch. Once Jaerel had calmed himself down for the time being, he set the gem on the back of Himmelkorn with his palm holding it tightly in place. When the gem's energy was transferred to Himmelkorn, the steed grunted and huffed, and his eyes widened as if he was suddenly wide awake, and had already eaten a plentiful meal of fresh hay, ripe apples, and perhaps the dream of a few long carrots. Jaerel looked behind him, but found the Voldoon just inches away from pulling the horse to the ground. A cold sweat formed on Jaerel's forehead, and his hands were beginning to drip. He hoped more than anything that they would not slip. But just when hope seemed lost, Himmelkorn jolted forward with immense strength, bolting out of the phantom's reach in a second, and in a breathtaking moment he had lost his chaser completely. The unusual gray clouds became clear again, the ground felt smoother, and the moon shone its brilliant luminescent blue light upon the travelers. Yet even with the shimmer of hope, they were far from safety. An hour of tireless riding continued until Jaerel saw another great hill in the distance, not as steep as Telshin, but tall enough to contain hidden tunnels and caves. Arriving at the hill at the end of the next hour, Jaerel guessed it to be the landmark Belishas, once used for caravans and traders if they did not want to use the main travel road. He had heard of this hill before, as it was part of the Corvel region, where both Avalon and Mason Rokine were located, though the cities were in the far left corner, while Belishas was in the center. Cutting across the plains of Corvel, they could find rest here as their halfway point, either on their way to the edges of the Chemcore forest, or to follow the northern travel road straight to Avalon itself. Presently, Belishas was rarely used, perhaps for garbling goblins or frightened foxes, but the hill was considered vacant. When Jaerel finally approached the hill, he recognized empty spots scattered around the cliffsides, each having a blackened circular mark on them, representing past campfires of weary travelers. But Jaerel skimmed past them until he had Himmelkorn trot to the north side of Pelishas, where he, fortunately, found a deep cave. However, he and Koraven had to wiggle their way inside until they found themselves in an open cavern, tall enough for Jaerel to stand. Himmelkorn was swiftly tied to the outside by Koraven. Shockingly, the horse stood perfectly still, as if he wanted to keep watch for his newfound riders, or to meet Beldorn again, if the chance arose happily. Luckily for all of them, no other enemies would present themselves tonight. Koraven had fallen asleep, his pack nudging his neck rather uncomfortably, but with so much terror and stress, the gnome grew utterly weak. By the time the pair rested, Jaerel slipped the gem back into his pocket, although he desperately wanted to gaze into its beauty again. He remembered Sirvin's caution against using the gem, especially in the view or presence of a powerful enemy. Rather, he sat near Koraven in the dark, attempting to reach any life form near to him. Reaching out with his mind, he found the busy lives of insects burrowing in Belishas, from the pinnacle of the hill, scattered with clumps of tall grass and patches of dried dirt, to the deep crevices below his feet, cold and clammy. The swaying fields outside seemed to calm him, soothing his own mind that he managed to lengthen the distance to which he could sense the entire hill. Each presence was the same to the half-breed, though one time when a scampering rabbit came rushing through, he jumped back, almost tripping over Koraven. Joking to himself, he went back to what he called a magile meditation, and he remained in the same cross-legged position for the next 3 hours until 2 strong orbs of energy crossed into the realms of Belishas. Startled, Jaerel snapped back to his regular vision, keeping watch over the one entrance they had. But when something began to move behind him, waking Koraven from his long slumber, he saw the curved rocky wall of the cave slide inward and outward. To his surprise, Tiradon clambered his way into the cave with his new friend, or at least new to Jaerel and Koraven. Jaerel was not so sure which to be most shocked about, Tiradon literally moving the stones away as if they were nothing but straw, or the new figure to step in after him. Nevertheless, the being that proceeded inside the cavern was most definitely a kind one. A magnificent and fair elven lady stood proudly beside Tiradon, holding a small blue glass orb in her hand, glowing with great beauty. Her fashion was of an eccentric warrior, having thin armor strapped tightly to herself, designed with delicate care, colored with emerald green, and golden strips along her waist and shoulders. She had smooth black hair running down her back, and her face was gentle, kind, vibrant, and full of life. Her eyes were a brilliant shade of green, like the leaves of a fully blossomed tree. When Jaerel looked upon her, he could tell that she had seen many battles before. Elves in battle were rarely seen, but given the circumstance they were graceful, swift, and proficient with their blades, and arrows darted through the air as if they were made of the wind itself. With Jaerel's senses, he knew this particular elf was very skilled, even upon looking at her through non-Magillian eyes. He glanced to her side, where a curved sword was sheathed at her waist, while a similarly designed dagger rested on the other. Silver runes were engraved on each of the scabbards to protect her weapons and to enchant the sharpness and strength of the blade. "No need to be afraid," Tiradon said to both of them. "She is an ally and close friend. You can trust her for your safety." Jaerel glanced at Koraven, who was in complete awe of the elf. The reverence that Koraven had for elves was immense. Now that he had personally met 2 in nearly a day, his mind was racing with exhilarating thoughts, wondering if he could somehow be brushed with their magic, or be told wonderful spells of protection and agility. He would not admit it out loud, but Koraven desired to learn magic, but was too stubborn to allow Jaerel to teach him, only to be instructed by an elven teacher. He looked up to this elven lady, hoping she would start this dream. "I am Galindia," she introduced herself, her voice smooth and calm. "I am also a close friend to High Elf Lord Sirvin, and to Calithnil, or Caladel, the roaming wizard." At the sound of Caladel's name, Jaerel's ears perked up but said nothing. He had never heard of Caladel's other name of Calithnil, though, and decided when the next chance came, he would ask the wizard what was his true name. "This is Jaerel," Tiradon said, realizing neither of his comrades could say anything. "And this is Koraven. They trust one another with their lives, and likewise, so do I and Galindia. Therefore, you can trust her if you do with me." "In this time of our age," Jaerel finally said, "it's difficult to trust anyone." "But you mustn't worry," Galindia assured them. "For now, though, it is not the time for lengthy introductions or conversations. We must make sure you are safe in Mason Rokine within the next week. Your pursuers are not far behind. Can we at least stop in Ovlin? Koraven asked. No, we cannot go there, Tiradon answered strongly. If we go to Ovlin, the Vol'dun will be aware of the gnomish community, and I would never want your peaceful people to mingle with evil beings. They would never take sides with such horrible things, argued Koraven with a sharp tone. We would fight them until they would be out of our borders and sent past our fields. I am certain they would fight, Tiradon said calmly, but these phantoms are tricky and elusive. They may be able to blend into several surroundings, a trick even the strongest of Magiles, and attempt to steal your very soul. Even I do not know their bounds to their Volcavian magic. Then where must we go? Jaerel wondered. What roads or trails can we be on? Either north of the Chemcor forest or through it, the ranger suggested. Coming from both Ovlin and Mason Rokine, I assume both of you know the woods well. Like the back of my hand, Koraven said proudly. You must leave when the morning comes, Galindia told them. I will distract them the best I can, but there is no guarantee that I can attract all three. The more distance you cover during the day, the better. Who said you were going to be the only one out there? Tiradon asked in shock. I'll come with you. No, you cannot. If what you have told me is true, then the half-breed's mission is more important than my safety. I'm faster on the horse, so I may be able to lead them to a point where it would be impossible to catch up to you in time. And what would happen to you? Jaerel asked. You're as good as gone if they capture you. Also, there may be 4 rather than 3. While you were dueling them at the top of Telshin, another assaulted me. I was only saved by the bravery of Cori here. Koraven stood tall and puffed his chest out proudly, his chin lifted high as he grinned ear to ear. Even with a brief compliment from another, gnomes were always keen to welcome good comments about themselves. Then your journey shall be safer than I think, said Galindia. If the gem is safely returned to Sirvan and Mason Rokine, then I am willing to take such risks. Please, Tiradon placed his hand in Galindia's. Don't do this. We can make a new plan. There's no time to argue. Dawn is approaching and I must be off. Jaerel, this may sound absurd, but may I use your outer cloak? Yes, I suppose so, he replied, very much astounded as he unclipped the deep green cloak, handing it over to her, who then tied it neatly upon her back. Before surrendering his coat, he nearly forgot about the gem in the front pocket and was able to slip it into his hand at the last second. Another shoot of confidence spread into Jaerel's arm and into his body, and as he thought about which paths he and Koraven would take once they arrived at the Chemcor forest, he began to have a wave of confidence that they would make it through safely, to see his parents again with wide-open arms, and the gnomes to welcome them with full plates of delectable meals. Cracking open a smile, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted. Come, I will show you a spell, the elf said to them. Just as Galindia mentioned, the sun had barely peeked over the horizon as the small company stepped back into the wide world. The horses happily grazed the various plants and grass about them, giving joyous whinnies and grunts, shaking their manes and whipping their tails back and forth. Tiradon came up to Beldorn, feeding him a secret red apple as he stashed away in his thick outer cloak. Munching on it with satisfaction, Beldorn finished the apple instantly, nudging his rider for another. Galindia beckoned Jaerel and Koraven over as she mounted her horse, a magnificent white stallion with a silver mane and tail. The saddle was fashioned in the finest leather and had a cushion to sit upon. Numerous side pockets on each side were filled with potions and small spellbooks, and at the back she tied her elven-forged bow and slender quiver of arrows. With a bright smile, Galindia introduced her magnificent steed as Nalissa, and gave her a soft pat upon her straightened mane. Situating herself in the saddle, Galindia sat up straight and announced the spell. Emil Daldian. To Jaerel and Koraven's shock, the elf's appearance began to morph. Galindia's hair shortened, curled and waved, stopped near her shoulders. Her skin became rough, and when she turned her back, the half-breed suddenly saw himself on the horse, or rather, the illusioned version. Koraven's mouth gaped open with curiosity while Jaerel squinted his eyes in astonishment. The level of detail that this elf suddenly had about his own body was astounding, and it was only through the passing of a coat. Tiradon smirked at their expressions as he combed Beldorn's mane with his fingers. The magic of elves is amazing, Jaerel admitted. It is indeed, Tiradon agreed, but we must not waste precious sunlight. Tiradon was right. Even if they had the advantage of daylight, the Vol'dun could still travel at an absurdly fast pace, quicker than any of them, and if not for the gem's power, quicker than their horses as well. When the sun had completely risen past the horizon, Tiradon saw Galindia off in a hurry, but had closed words with her that Jaerel couldn't make out, nor would he want to interject. The pair of warriors stood still for a moment until Galindia announced in her elven tongue the spell of speed, directing her straight west for the travel road. Fear in her heart, she still hoped to draw the enemy to her. Tiradon watched her ride past the hills with an anxious gaze, wondering if that would be the last day with her. But he couldn't let such dark thoughts take over him now. An hour passed before Tiradon decided to take off, and when they did, Jaerel could sense Himmelkorn's renewed strength still replenished within, and he was very grateful. The wind whipped through his hair ferociously while the sun beat down upon the trio for several hours before they came across a region of smaller hills, which Tiradon knew as Bromalden, though there was no historical importance to them, and was rarely placed on maps. These were more rounded and much greener, if they chose the perfect spot. It was an amazing place to nap. To Koraven's delight, the group's first and only stop was to rest and replenish strength, which meant a decent meal and fresh stream water to wash it down. Tiradon remained restless, tearing at the grass, darting his eyes in every direction, as if Galindia was to reappear with her elven abilities. But when she did not show herself and the two friends had their brief rest, the ranger had no choice but to continue their trek. From then on, Tiradon took the back of the small troop, for he feared that even with a diversion already in place, there were still 3 more Vol'dun who had not made their presence known yet, and he wished to keep it that way. The northern travel road, known as the Teok Road, was just a day's ride away from now. From there, the Kemkor forest bordered a majority of the road, keeping a rather unusual aura about it, but nowhere near as enchanting as the Korlag forest. Koraven had ventured into the Kemkor woods several times before, bewildered by everything inside, and admittedly got lost many times, finding his way back either by luck or following tracks of deer and elk. The gnome had never reached the center of the woods, though, and he wished to discover it quite badly. But in his words, there seemed to be a strange boundary, as if made by sorcery, blocking any passage to the center. Jaerel had attempted to blow through it with a Magillian spell, but nothing broke the wall. Frustrated with their results, their friends had not returned to that place in almost 2 years, but since they were given one last chance to explore it, Jaerel and Koraven had a better feeling about it. That night and through the next day was ridden in complete silence, shared between the travelers, weary of the relentless pursuit, expecting another attack any second of the day. But once Jaerel spotted the Teok Road a few miles ahead, the trio began to have hope again, lifting their spirits that perhaps some good would come out of all this. Approaching the wide, flattened dirt road, Jaerel and Koraven twisted their heads to the west, where if they followed the path for just a few more days, they would come across Avlin, their home, and their comfort. But Tiradon thought otherwise. The Vol'dun were still present, and more were still to come. When Jaerel began to see it through the ranger's eyes, though, he could feel a sense of protection and care over the gnomes. Somehow, Tiradon knew of the gnomes and felt compassion onto them. Perhaps he knew of the tragic downfall of the peaceful people, wishing it would not happen a second time. Jaerel looked upon the ranger with a strong friendship then, even if Tiradon did not feel the same, but for some reason the half-breed knew it was a mutual experience. "You must go on," Tiradon said to both Jaerel and Koraven, kneeling to the gnome first. "Take the safest trails through the forest, even if it means a day or 2 longer." "What do you mean?" Jaerel asked, though he knew the answer right away. "I will stay behind," he explained. "The Vol'dun pick off the stragglers first, but Galindia and I are no such thing. It will give you time and space to achieve your mission, which is the first and foremost important part." "Will we see you again, kind sir?" Koraven asked, concerned with his face downcast. Tiradon patted the gnome on the shoulder, who glanced up with fear and sorrow. "Stay true to the faith," Tiradon told him. "Whatever promises you have made, let it become your strength. There is always hope." Tiradon said nothing, but a strong urge within his heart swelled up as he stood to his full height, though it was barely past Tiradon's chest. He felt as if he could once again fight the Vol'dun upon the vicious hilltop, and a troop of orcs after. Jaerel mounted Himmelkorn swiftly, with Koraven seated directly behind. "Whatever the enemy," Tiradon warned them, mostly to Jaerel now, "never take the gem out, lest it be in front of Sirvan." "What about Kaladel?" Koraven wondered. "Yes, the wizard should know much about the stones," the ranger said, confident that the gem was indeed in safe hands. "I cannot linger here for too long. You must go on, and therefore I must warn you again. Be close to one another, and never use the gem." Yeah, and that is the end of chapter 3. Yeah, I had a it was definitely longer than I thought, but rereading, I guess my book is going to take a while. As it is a 600-page book. So, yeah, this chapter actually was very it's definitely like a key moment in the book. It's the first time that basically Jaerel loses in a way in a fight with the Vol'dun basically pouncing upon him and casting that terrible, like almost like a curse onto him. They're basically this is like the initial fight where I guess you as the reader or listener can see how terrible just one of the Vol'dun can be when a victim falls prey. I guess falls into the clutches of these phantoms. So I really wanted to demonstrate the terror that the Vol'dun kind of presents itself onto others. And while the victim is under the spell of the Vol'dun, it basically is trying to drain the life essence out of the victim at the same time. So I really wanted like a very powerful enemy to have very powerful servants. So just to think that the Vol'dun aren't really even the main enemy here, I thought I was trying to really put that message out. But other than that, yeah, the action kind of ramped up a little bit here. So, each chapter has something in it. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Definitely apologize for any background sound. It's a little loud sometimes outside. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys will continue to listen to my book. There will be plenty more fights to come, larger in scale and whatnot, at a later time. And like I said before, when I'm writing these books, I tend to spread out the history of Ordia slowly across each book. So book 1 through 5 will all have different aspects of the history that I've made, and it's just spread out across all the series, which I think is a very interesting and very fun thing for me to do. But let me know your guys' thoughts on this chapter 3 of Telshin. Yeah, let me know if I do anything good, if I need to work on anything, things like that, because it's always helpful to me. So I think with all that out of the way and being said, just stay tuned for another episode, and I'll see you guys in the next chapter. Farewell.